it's just a really noisy space. And we see a very, very long tail of things. And that's part of the reason why I'm hoping that today we can address the things that are fundamental, no matter what tools you're using. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when we talk about like, what are the best practices, is like, how do you make sure that your whole business doesn't crater and all of your reporting doesn't just evaporate every time something changes about that tool stack, because it's constantly changing. Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm pleased to be joined today by our good friend here at Parakeeto, friend of the show, friend of our clients, Carson Pierce. Thanks for being here today.
Employed by Parakeeto, have to be here.
Yeah.
I don't have to be here.
Yeah. It's funny. It's like one of those videos of people that are like in a hostage situation, and it's like,
yeah,
just say what we told you to say. Carson is here by his own volition. He has the option to not do these podcasts, but no, I'm excited that we're doing more of these internal discussions. And we're talking today about something that you are sort of our czar internally for this. You're the person that has taken it upon themselves to build little pie charts and post them in our internal Slack channel about what tools our clients are using for things like time tracking and project management, and project management tools are what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And I mean, my own personal experience with this goes back a long ways too. Actually, I was thinking about it this morning. I started doing project management work before really tools existed. I mean, I guess Basecamp is probably back there somewhere, but most of the time it was just whatever we could piece together ourselves. And things have evolved so much since then. I also had a flashback to a time when I was working at an agency, which was not that big. We were like 30 people. And we started using a tool called EPM Live, which was way, way, way too big for what we were doing. And I watched we only had a PM team of like 3 people, one guy who basically spent all day, every day, just trying to update data in this software. It was awful. So yeah, things have come a long, long way since then. And there's some really good options out there now. So let's chat a little bit about that.
Awesome. Let's do it. I think you're going to guide us through this conversation, so I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when people see the title of the podcast, the first thing they're probably going to say is like, oh, what software should I be using? So we might as well just get that out of the way. I have 2 answers to that. One, we don't care. From a Parakeeto perspective, there's just so many good options. They can all do a good job of what they need to do. And for Parakeeto, we can work with pretty much anything. And we have clients coming to us all the time with whatever, and we can make it work pretty much. So that's not my main concern. And really, you'll hear it a lot when people talk about tool selection. It's like, well, what are people on your team going to use? And there's just so many good options. So in terms of what people are using, so that the pie charts you talked about, me tracking everything of the clients that we work with, of which of course are all like digital marketing agencies, that kind of thing. I've seen probably 3 main ones that come up over and over and over. And those are Asana, ClickUp, and Teamwork. There are other ones that are mixed in there too. Monday is pretty popular. Jira, if you're into the more technical stuff, is in there. And we're starting to see a little bit more of the all-in-one tools creep in a bit. And one that we haven't seen ourselves a lot yet, but I really like, is Scoro. And I know you just talked to Harv over there recently. Tools like that, I think, are starting to emerge as well. So I don't know. Are you hearing anything else from you talk to a lot of people. I'm focusing more on the ones we work with.
Yeah, and I'm also like a SaaS guy. As you know, I wrote a whole book on software as a science. And the project management, time tracking, resourcing, professional services automation space is such a crapshoot. Like in terms of the competitive landscape, it's such a red ocean. And I think this is part of the reason that people are always they're always asking the question of like, what tools should I be focused on? Because it feels like there's so many choices and there's new ones all the time that are emerging. And so I would group them into, I think, three broad categories, but the problem is the lines between these categories are basically gone now. It's just there's so much gray where it's like you don't know where the feature set of one tool starts and the feature set of another tool ends. But like the core project management tools would be the Asana, Monday, ClickUp, Teamwork. Those are the ones that we see most commonly. Jira with technical teams, and in some cases, in larger firms that have a technical team, we see them using one for like the creatives and then Jira for the engineering team, and so that can be a fun exercise of saying, how do we get these two things to like talk to each other? The more all-in-one, Scoro is definitely a leader there. Productive.io we're seeing emerge a lot, especially among smaller firms. There's a new one called Alfred.io that is interesting. Workamajig, Cantana are some of like the more established, I'll say, dare I use the word incumbent solutions in that space. And of course, the lines are getting much blurrier all the time between what isn't like an all-in-one or what we would historically have referred to as a PSA or professional services automation platform versus like these core project management tools that have gotten so big and raised so much money and been around now for a really long time that their feature set has expanded to be pretty damn close, especially if you start to consider their app stores and integrations to that of a PSA. And then you have these sort of like fringe tools that are all sort of creeping into project management. So like some time tracking tools that have now started adding resource planning and task management. And so it's like everyone's sort of starting to converge around project management. So you have the parallaxes, the floats, the harvest forecast, the toggle plans, the resource gurus, the 10,000 feet, which was acquired by Smartsheet. So now that's just Smartsheet, right? All of that. And then you have this other category that's emerging that's sort of like, it's not a project management tool, but you can use it like that. So it's like Notion, Airtable, right? Podio, these sort of like general like work management or database, almost like modern Microsoft Access type tools. And I've seen a couple of instances where people are running their whole project management system out of Notion or out of Airtable. So that's, I think, a little bit suited to people that really want to customize and automate and sort of plug this into this new ecosystem of Zapier and Gumloop and N8N and automation type tools. Anyway, it's just a really noisy space, and we see a very, very long tail of things. And that's part of the reason why I'm hoping that today we can address the things that are fundamental, no matter what tools you're using. Because the other thing that's true is people are changing their tools all the time. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when we talk about like, what are the best practices, is like, how do you make sure that your whole business doesn't crater and all of your reporting doesn't just evaporate every time something changes about that tool stack, because it's constantly changing.
Yeah, for sure. I was just looking at Carl Sages's project management tool list. He's got 98, I think, on there right now. And I know that in the last few months, I've sent him 2 or 3. So they're constantly coming in. I was also just listening to a podcast that said there's 480 PM tools out there. I don't know what they're counting, but it's crazy. And the change management, I'm on the Bureau Slack. And I mean, every week, probably, you can talk to someone who is going, oh, we're switching from, ClickUp to Asana or back and forth, whatever. There's no pattern to it. It's just people are going, oh, this isn't quite meeting our needs. We need to change something. And that can be, I've certainly worked at places where we always chase the next shiny thing. Every year or two, we switch. And it's a pain. It's a huge pain to do that switching. So you have to have a good reason for it. But something I think I've heard you say before is the tool isn't as critical as the process behind it. So maybe we can get into that a little bit, is understanding not so much the piece of technology that we're using, but what do we need to make sure is working before we even think about using a tool?
Yeah. And so this conversation, I have such mixed emotions about it, because it's such an important conversation, but it also just sounds like such sort of like the same word salad bullshit that everybody talks about with tooling implementations, where it's like, or just any kind of change management. You really got to get aligned about your objectives and, what the stakeholders are and what their needs are. But it's like all of that is actually really, really true, especially when it comes to project management, because this really is kind of the beating heart and the center of your entire FinOps system. Like a lot of this is going to revolve around project management and the decisions that get made there. Sorry, I can't speak today. And the other tools that are chained off of that. Upstream from that, you're going to have things like CRM. You're going to have, finance, which is both upstream and downstream from that. You're going to have, time tracking and resource planning. And that spectrum is really quite complex. And so I think one of the big ideas that is important for people to consider here is there's two main categories of needs that are often trying to be addressed when the conversation about installing new tools is happening. One track is workflow questions, right? So, and that's really about how do we get the work that we do done more efficiently? How do we enable the process by which we manage and execute on and communicate about and collaborate on work done more efficiently? That's one whole set of problems, which are all incredibly nuanced and complicated enough on their own. I would argue that that is probably like the most important question for the evaluation of which tools we're going to use. Then you have a second question, which has to do with reporting and information. And, that's a question of what are the metrics that we want to be tracking and how are we going to calculate those and how often do we want to look at them and at what levels of fidelity are we breaking these things down? What segments do we want to be able to observe and compare over time? And what needs to be true from like a data input, data output, compliance structure perspective to make those things happen. And this is sort of where we focus at Parakeeto. And people might be surprised that our stance is like, we really don't care what you use, because I don't think we've ever run into a situation, maybe once or twice, where a client literally couldn't accomplish their reporting objectives on whatever system they were using. And that system could have been spreadsheets or like a Notion database or even the most basic project management tools. So the big idea here is, I think the most important thing to be militant about is like, is this enabling the workflow? Because the better you can do at enabling the workflow, the more likely it is that you're going to have enough compliance that like the data in there is going to be complete and is going to, have a decent enough structure. And then a lot of the reporting, the likelihood you're going to get that solved inside of the project management tool is close to zero, especially over a long time horizon. So you should just expect that like that is a different problem solved by different tools and a different process, but that the PM tool will feed data into that, and that's fine. And the structure, if you set this up correctly and you handle operations data the right way, there can be a lot of noise in that data and you can still get the right outcome. So that's, I think, a big idea is focus on the workflow side of things first and foremost, but still have an understanding of how you're going to accomplish the reporting outputs.
It's funny because I was thinking about that same question on my own before you gave your answer, I swear. And I had the same thing. Mine was like, how do we get things done? And how do we get some data out of this? And of course, at Parakeeto, we're focused on the data side of things. So that would be somewhere we care about. But, the getting things done part, most of them do a pretty good job of that. And it's more about, what do you like to use? What do you enjoy using? Like, I know internally here at Parakeeto, we use Asana and I love it. I think I've been at 3 different agencies now where we've used Asana and it's always been my favorite. I even use it for personal stuff. So the fact that I enjoy that interface and I enjoy being in there means, yeah, I'm going to use it more effectively. I'm going to get the data is going to be going in that we need to then pull out. But you touched on that a little bit about compliance. And so, and also you said that you can't trust your tool to give you good reporting out of the box. So I want to dig into that a little bit more too. Because I think there's an assumption that, hey, we're going to implement this tool. We're all going to be great at it. And we're going to get these perfect reports that come out of it. And that's not what we see usually. So tell us a little bit more about what you see on that side.
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing to just sort of explain to people. and this has been true about both the clients that have sort of a set of best of breed tools, so a PM tool, a time tracking tool, a resourcing tool, a finance tool, all sort of separate, but working together in a chain, versus the people that are in all-in-ones. I have literally never, ever seen a client that 100% automated all of their reporting and had it kind of all running in one platform. Even the ones that were using like an all-in-one end-to-end tool that handled everything from their CRM to their finance, they've all ended up in spreadsheets for at least some portion of their reporting, or not even necessarily spreadsheets, but some other workflow. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And these are not Parakeeto opinion type things. These are just like literally best practices that if you go up market to any enterprise organization that's dealing with large amounts of data, they're not using the source of truth system of record architecture anymore. That expired a very long time ago. This idea that like, oh, you have your ERP and you stuff everything in there and you try to make sure the data is clean. It's like, that doesn't work. It doesn't work because the inputs aren't going to be clean consistently, especially when you're talking about data that your whole team is creating manually every single day, like time tracking and project. It's like, assume there's going to be mistakes in that. It's very, very hard to stop mistakes from happening. Even if you can get mistakes to stop happening, the second question is that data going to change structure over time? And the answer is yes, of course it will. You're going to rename things. You're going to change how stuff gets set up. You're going to change how your products are packaged. You're going to change how the PM team organizes things. Maybe you have two teams that just want to do things differently. You're going to have a new PM leader that comes in and says, oh, we need to completely change the workflow for how we, like, that stuff is going to change. The upstream and downstream tools are going to change. The platform itself is going to make architectural changes, and you might change tools. So again, the system of record type of idea breaks in that because A, it's very likely that system of record is going to change, but then B, you might have an object or a naming convention that shifts and now your reporting is broken. And unless you have a way to go in and clean up all of that historical data, that's going to be a big problem. And then the last piece is that reporting is not really a key feature in a lot of these platforms. And what I mean by that is there's a difference between running a report that is like, show me every time entry between this date and this date, or, show me all of the tasks that are scheduled from this, like exporting tables of data. That's one thing. You could call that reporting, but that's not data visualization. It's not business intelligence, right? And so some platforms are going in that direction, but the likelihood that you're going to find a platform that is A, great at the workflow and really fits your needs, B, has all the integrations available to bring all of the data that you need into the platform, C, is able to get you clean and consistent data structures over time and really gives you the tools to be able to manage that well. And then lastly, has an adequate data visualization tool set for you to be able to like actually look at, calculate, and visualize all the different metrics that you need. The likelihood of that happening is extremely low. And if you do accomplish it, the likelihood that that's going to persist over long periods of time is also extremely low. So from my perspective, it's like asking the PM tool to do both of those things is sort of setting you up for failure. And again, it's just not a best practice. There's no enterprise company that's still using this system of record architecture. They're all using more of an extract, transform, load, or extract, load, transform framework, and assuming the data is going to come out of the tools where it's being created and go into a proper set of tools for cleaning up and visualizing data.
Yeah. And well, my background is project management. I think a lot of people listening to this are probably in project management, and there's a real struggle with this fundamental concept that the data is not going to be perfect. And because I think we want our timelines, we want our plans to be exactly perfectly precise and all line up just like an accountant would do with their work. And it just doesn't happen. And you kind of have to step up away from it a little bit and go, okay, we need to approach this in a different way. So I have a question, which is, if our tools cannot do what we really need them to do in that sense, what's the solution? You touched on it a little bit, but like, how do we get from what it can do to what we need it to do?
And are you speaking specifically to the data side of things?
Yeah, on the data reporting side.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this in other episodes, but I'll summarize it in that the simple answer is we use an ETL framework, extract, transform, load, or an ELT framework. And so a lot of people listening to this, you're already doing this. You might just not realize that it's happening. The assumption there should be, okay, this data is going to live in one, but likely several places. We're going to need to extract it from that system, probably by running, reports, exporting those as CSVs, importing them into an environment where we can then do quality assurance and transformation on the data. So that's things like looking at the 17 different ways that people spelled design when they were logging time entries and normalizing that to design, so that the upstream report where we say how much design time did we spend on our last 15 projects, you can actually run that report, because rather than having 17 different naming conventions for design, you just have one, or the 6 different versions of the client's name, or the 99-hour time entry that should have gotten logged. Or all of these kinds of things that you're just gonna see in the data. Or, oh, hey, we have a year's worth of time tracking data from when we're using Toggle that we now need to normalize to the time tracking data that we have in Harvest, but the naming conventions were different, the objects were different, the format for the dates was different, right? So like that's stuff that you just you need to handle that. That's just a reality in any data set. So give yourself a set of tools to do that. And a spreadsheet is a perfectly valid solution in the early days. As you get more sophisticated, you might, engage with a team like ours, or you might start to look at, building an actual data pipeline using data pipeline tools and having a data analyst or a data engineer do that stuff if you have more scale. But that is sort of the assumption that you should make, is that that's a step in the process that is both necessary and helpful. It's very helpful and gives you a lot more freedom in terms of how you set up those tools from a workflow perspective, and allow your team to make changes that they need to make to keep the work happening without having to worry about it completely nuking all of your reporting downstream, because it doesn't give you the ability to account for these things.
Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. And with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it.
Yeah. And the ETL process you're talking about is really more on the end side of things. Like once you get the data in place, that's when we take into that process. But there's a whole process around the beginning part of this, which is how do you structure your data in the first place to make sure you're at least as close as you can be. And the example I always think about is I just remember working at so many places where we would have these detailed estimates broken down in a certain way. And then we get into the time tracking tool and it's broken down in a completely different way. It's like, was our estimate good or no good? No idea, because there was no way to map the two things together. So just understanding how to structure your data in the first place so you get close enough that the ETL framework can do its magic afterwards.
100%. And so just to kind of speak to some best practices on that, and you take clients through this process a lot more than I do these days. But we have a whole process that we go through with clients, right? To say what needs to be true in order for us to get these reports out of your current tools. And a lot of times there's not much change that needs to happen in their tools. Actually, we're able to look at how they're currently doing things and then just write logic statements. But writing the logic statement, I think, is a really powerful exercise. And what I mean by that is it's an if this then that sort of statement. So if I'm trying to say, okay, I want to be able to look at our average billable rate by product. And we have 3 main products that we want to look at: websites, SEO, and brand strategy. Then the logic statement needs to look like, what are the requirements for that? Well, I need to know if a project belongs to one of those 3 product categories. And then I need to be able to match time up to that project. And then let's say I want to add another parameter to this. I also want to know how many hours were spent by role category. And our role categories are design, project management, and copywriting. So then I also need to understand for each time entry, what category was that logged to? So then the question is just sort of mapping, okay, well, those are the requirements. Let's look at our system. How would we accomplish that? And so one of the key principles is we want to try to take as much of the burden of keeping track of those things off of the team and off of the time entries. to the extent that we can reduce the metadata that needs to be captured on a time entry, the more likely it is that we're going to have clean enough data to do this thing. So in the question of, for example, what category does this project belong to? We probably want that to exist on the project, right? As opposed to every time somebody logs time, they have to remember to like add a tag that says, oh, this time entry is for this product line. And similarly, for the role categories, rather than every time somebody logs an hour of time, having to remember to say, oh, is this design time or project management time or whatever? It's like we should actually grab that from the person. So we can write a logic statement that says, if Carson logs an hour of time, then the role category is design. And if Kristen logs an hour of time, the role category is project management. And if this person, right? So I can automate that logic, and I now remove that responsibility from the team. I remove that thinking from the team. And as much as possible, we want to try to remove all of this responsibility from the team and reduce the amount of structured data that needs to exist in the system where they have to get it right 100% of the time or the system breaks. We want to try to reduce that as much as possible. So even something as simple as like, let's say you do end up with the team entering what category these things belong to in the project management system. Well, then at least you can write a system that says, okay, people spell this a little bit differently. Like Carson spells it design. This other project manager calls it designer. This person over here likes to differentiate between UX design and UI design. This other person over here says graphic design. Well, now the logic statement is, if the task is called any one of these 7 things, then normalize it to design. So that's sort of the thinking is, how do you just write a logic statement that says, if these things are true, then the output is this. And that's how you kind of get this often very messy or very noisy data, or data that requires sort of a few different objects to come together to end up in a format that is fairly structured and fairly standardized and is able to answer the question that you set out to answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think without that, we end up making decisions based on messy data, and those decisions can often be wrong. So there's a trust factor that you have to have with the data that you're working with. And a lot of the times that's misplaced trust. We assume that everything is okay and good when it's not. So we need to take the time to analyze that and clean it up as much as possible. So looping back right to the beginning about tool selection, we kind of talked a lot about how tool selection is not that important, but so then how do we even choose? How do we choose a piece of software for project management when, we're basically saying anything will work, depends on what your team wants to use, that kind of thing.
Yeah. This is where I think, in my opinion, when we're working with clients that do want help installing a new project management tool, it always starts with, okay, let's look at the workflow. Let's look at like how you actually work and try to identify tools that are going to enable that first and foremost. And then, of course, we want to do some checks and balances on, will that be able to produce data that gets us the outputs that we need? But again, that's almost never a problem when you know how to handle that well. Now, of course, the first answer is no change is the best outcome, right? So, if we come back to like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What's the reason for even wanting to have this conversation? If you can accomplish a solution without having to change your project management tool, then that's probably the first option that you should evaluate. And that's usually the first thing we're trying to accomplish as well. Is like, how do we get the outcomes that we're looking for without changing anything? Because it's a painful and expensive process, and it is high risk. And the problem is, there's the devils you know, and there's the devils you don't. There are going to be things that you hate about the next platform too. Right? Like, they all have their idiosyncrasies. They're all kind of crappy in their own unique ways. They all have an integration on the website that says it's going to do what you need it to do. And then you get in there and you realize that there's this one random field that for whatever reason is not in the API, and it doesn't shoot through, or it does in a format that doesn't speak to the other thing, and then it doesn't work. All that is true all the time. So can you not change it? And then if you do have to change it, start with the workflow and map your workflow. And if that mapping the workflow exercise exposes that you don't have a workflow, then you should fix that first. Because without understanding, like, how does work actually move through our platform and move through our business, and what are the requirements along the way, and what do people need to do, then it's very, very hard to find a tool that's going to do that, because we don't really know what it's trying to do. And keep in mind that Again, if the workflow isn't very well defined, then you should probably try to make sure that the team is actually going to follow that workflow if you're making something new or making changes to it before you go and change tools. Because if you do those both at the same time, you're now having to deal with change management on the technology side, but then also in terms of like process and behaviors and ways of thinking. And that's a lot of change all at once. And that's really it. Once you've mapped the workflow, then you can go sort of evaluate different platforms based on those requirements. You could start to build shortlists, go through, the demos, go through the pilots, set up the test accounts, start getting feedback from the team and validating that these things are going to work, and then go and do a full out deployment. And I think the other key principle there is try not to over-engineer that initial deployment. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we see people make, especially on the data side, is they make their implementation way too complicated and precise, and they make the requirements for the team such that it's like impossible for the team to get it right. And then often their reporting is based on the assumption that all these things are going to be done right. And then their reporting doesn't work anymore because it's like, well, the team isn't going to get the naming convention right 100% of the time on every single new project forever. So yeah, that's a big sort of idea, is try to keep it as simple as possible if you are going to go through the process of evaluating and implementing something new.
Yeah, for sure. And the one piece of advice I would give on that is get some help from someone who's done it before or who specializes in this. I know there's agencies or people out there who specialize in helping you select software. There's also people who will help you implement a software once you've selected it, but having that perspective to guide you through the process rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and figure it out on your own would be really, really critical.
Yes, agreed. We know a lot of those people, so.
And I guess we are kind of some of those people. So
we do play a role in that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it then. Hopefully this has been helpful for people to understand at least our perspective on selecting project management software. We're not going to be the ones to come in and say, choose this, because we're not really affiliated with anyone and we can work with anything. But I think the process, the understanding of how you need to think about your data in the selection process is pretty critical. So hopefully that's helpful. Any last comments, Marcel?
I do want to speak to, there's just this one thing in here, all-in-one versus specialized tools. We sort of briefly touched on that, but I do want to just add a couple of notes on something interesting that you said, which was like earlier in the episode, you mentioned, it seems like these tools are sort of emerging. And that's really interesting to me because they were emerging 15 years ago as well. And then they sort of went away and now they're coming back again. And this is sort of the pendulum that swings in most SaaS industries. I mean, SaaS is not that old. It's like 30 years old as an industry, but you saw this in CRM. I think you're now seeing the second wave of this in PSAs and time tracking, where you have these sort of incumbent platforms that in the early days are the only option. And so everybody's using them. They sort of get really bloated. They try to do everything. I think in agency, this was like the PSA. And then people start to break away from those and go to best of breed tools because there are compromises with using these sort of all-in-one platforms. They tend to do a lot of things not as well as the best of breed tools that focus on a very small part of that value chain. And then they do that, they get frustrated with the fact that things are happening in a billion different places and their data is fragmented and their workflow can get a little bit cumbersome. And then the pendulum starts to swing back towards these all-in-one tools. And often what's driving that too is roll-ups and acquisitions and consolidation in the market. Like you're seeing this in project management, you're seeing it in time tracking, where private equity or some big player in the industry starts buying up a bunch of smaller players and rolling them into one. So that sort of pendulum seems to swing back and forth over these, 5 to 10 year time horizons. And I think we're seeing that in our industry again, where the last while there's been a shift towards these smaller best of breed tools. And now you're starting to see sort of a little bit more momentum for the all-in-one tools, but the debate rages on which one's better. And I think that's very, very contextual. And certainly there are compromises to both sides. There's not necessarily an answer. I think the answer lies in, for your firm, at this given moment in time, what is the thing that's going to enable your workflow the best and allow you to have the agility and flexibility if you're at a place where you don't have a very mature operation, or there's a lot of uncertainty about what and how you're going to do things into the future. That's sort of one of the biggest fears, and it is a justified fear of going to an all-in-one product, is a lot of the value that's touted in using an all-in-one product is predicated on the idea you're going to use it for sort of everything. And then as soon as like you outgrow part of it, or you have a piece that doesn't work for you anymore and you start to use other tools, then it almost forces you to start reevaluating the whole thing. And that's a lot of change to go through at once. And so I'd say for like agencies that are scaling, that are fairly mature, that have a pretty clear process, and they find an all-in-one that really enables what they do, great. For those that are maybe a little bit earlier, are going through a lot of change, have a lot of uncertainty, need the agility to be able to sort of reinvent themselves, then, using best of breed tools is probably a better way to enable that. But yeah, those compromises are very situational in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think there's just this general feeling like, oh, I'm using too many tools. I need to, pull things together somehow. I don't think we need to be as afraid of that as we used to be, because there's so many integrations happening. Like, your harvest time tracking will integrate with other things. And then, of course, like you mentioned earlier, we can still take data from these 3 different places and pull it all together in one. So we don't need to get so hung up on the idea that, oh, I've got too many tools.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing, right? That the integrations is something you've pointed at. And I think it's really important, again, to evaluate those integrations through those 2 different lenses. One, which is workflow, which is like, okay, I get that it's kind of annoying to put your project in here and then also go and put it in here, right? So to your point, it's getting easier and easier to sort of remove a lot of the friction from that. The thing that's challenging a lot of times is sequencing and then completeness of data, where it's like you're not putting the same information into your PM tool as you are into your finance tool, for example. And so it's like, even if you push some of that information over, there's still like 4 fields that only exist in QuickBooks that don't exist in this other place. So anyway, it's not always fully solvable. But then from a data perspective, it's like, if we have all kind of seen the light and agreed that there's no point in trying to push all of this data into one place because you're not going to get the reporting out of there anyway, then you can sort of drop that requirement. And then it maybe makes the pain of having a bunch of little tools less so, because you'll understand at least that even if you had an all-in-one tool, you'd still be pulling the data out of it to do your reporting anyway, most likely. So it's more of a workflow consideration. I think that's really the key thing. Stay focused on the workflow. And if having a bunch of little tools is really hindering your workflow, then yeah, there's probably a good case for going to something that's a little bit more integrated or a little bit more all-in-one. And if that's not the case, then there's probably some benefits and advantages to having the flexibility and agility to piece together the best thing that's available for that part of the business at a given moment in time. Question that everybody wanted answers to, which is just tell me what friggin' tools to use. We didn't answer that today, but we gave you the truth. And the truth is, it doesn't matter. So there you go.
All right. Perfect. Thanks, Marcel. This is good.
Thank you, Carson. This was fun. We'll see you all in the next episode.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day, because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.